Okay, so I just intend this to be a brief one. The Times and other newspapers are, of course, having a post-mortem on yesterday's leadership debate on Channel 4. The Times has said something curious, which I want to counter a little bit. This is what it says. It is tempting to decide that simply by not turning up, Boris Johnson was the winner of last night's televised debate. As plenty of his supporters were already arguing before the 90 minutes was up, Mr Johnson's decision not to take his place meant that he could not commit gaffes or appear nervous, or most likely become subject to a pile on of condemnation from the candidates arrayed against him. That sounds like a very strange way to defend the candidate by saying it's somehow strong to not be in a position where you're going to commit gaffes. That suggests that Johnson often commits gaffes. It's almost like Johnson needs to be protected from himself. Um, I have heard from people that, and I think this is a valid argument, that the whole process is taking a bit too long. They're talking about naming the new Prime Minister as late as July the 22nd, well over a month away. Well, just over a month away. Um, I should say that Johnson has agreed to take part in one on one debates when it gets narrowed down to two contenders, but I still think that not taking part last night was, whether it was politically a mistake or not, remains to be seen. I think it was, but morally, I think it's a mistake. Why should he escape the same scrutiny that these other men are facing? I just think that's a very arrogant attitude from him, his team, and yeah, his supporters as well. This idea that, oh, well, Boris doesn't need to, Boris is bigger than this, like he's somehow above scrutiny. And I know they'll say he's taking part in other debates. We'll see. I hope he does and I hope if it's versus Jeremy Hunt or Michael Gove or Dominic Raab, they, don't let him off the hook. They do put him on the spot. I know that politically Johnson might say, oh, we want to avoid blue on blue fighting. But the Tory party is divided right now. So is Labour. And it is right that when we're thinking about the Prime Minister of this country, that person is very closely scrutinised. I think it's a bit of a weak argument to say because he might make gaffes, we need to protect him from himself. That only shows that the candidate is liable to make gaffes. It's almost Trumpian style excuses that his team are coming out with. Not the first time that Boris Johnson and Donald Trump have been compared. Now, I think Johnson probably will be our next prime minister. I'd be surprised if he doesn't get through. Even though previous leadership contests, the winner, the favourite, hasn't won, Johnson is very popular. There's no question about that. And looking at Jeremy Hunt's page yesterday, that was full of Johnson supporters having a go at Hunt. And probably you'd see similar things on the other Tory leadership hopefuls. So it's irrefutable that Johnson is genuinely very popular with the grassroots. Um, Whether that's because of his colourful personality, whether that's because they really think he's the man for the job, I don't really know. I think it might be a combination of factors. Incidentally, I'm not dismissing Boris Johnson. I don't think he's a lightweight politician, despite the gaffes, despite the bumbling. I think he's actually quite smart. Um, I think he's a very skilled politician. I think he's a very skilled manoeuvrer. And I think he probably will be our next prime minister. But it's just the arguments that people are making for him not turning up, I take issue with. And I do think there's a Trumpian aspect to this, which is the last thing we need in the UK. We do not need a British Donald Trump. And I don't think that Trump and Johnson are exactly twins. I think there are some differences. But it's just a phony excuse. I will say this though: whoever is our next prime minister needs to stand up to China. Um, that to me is a pivotal issue right now in foreign policy, and I want to see a prime minister that, for once, stands up to China. Philip Hammond was coming out with this weak attitude that the government has to Huawei, this kind of halfway house. Um, he was saying, "Oh, of course we consider the security precautions, but Huawei is very important in Britain's telecoms infrastructure. No, not good enough, Chancellor. We need to see a government that is standing up to China, and I hope the next government does. And I hope the next government, because it's almost certain that whoever is the next prime minister will have a total cabinet reshuffle. That's the usual thing. There'll be a new chancellor, there'll be a new foreign secretary, home secretary, because that's the thing. You know, we always think of the prime minister, but the other great offices of state will also need to be filled. So um, I really don't see why Johnson should not face the same level of scrutiny. Okay, it's good he's going to take part in the later debates, but that will be one on one. Some people might say the format of having what would be six candidates in a debate is too messy, but you know, those 120,000 Tory activists are going to determine our next prime minister, and they should have a varied choice. They should know what they're voting for.